Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for braving this beautiful fall weather as we gather tonight for the second of our Eucharistic revival in a series of, I think it's 10 by the time we're done, maybe even 11 if you include the retreat. So in case I forget, and I didn't put it on the handout that you have, our retreat, which is November 11th, begins at 8:30 in the morning here with Mass and will be concluded by 3 p.m., is also part of our revival series. So tonight we are coming back to the beginning, and then we're going to, for our November 11th retreat, we're going to look at the Liturgy of the Word. So we'll have some little pieces. By the time we finish all 10, you'll have the whole Mass. Just trust us. It's kind of like building blocks, right? So you'll get the whole set, but you have to come to them all in order to get the whole set. Well, let us begin tonight in prayer. And tonight we are looking at procession. And it's more than just the entrance procession. Of course, that's what we often think about when we think of a procession. We think of the entrance procession. There are many times that the church asks us to move. And you know, as well as I do, that as Catholics, we don't like to move, right? It's my seat. I got here early to get this seat, and I'm not going to give it up. If I get up, somebody might take my seat. Yeah, you all know that. You all know that because you're basically sitting in your seats that you sit in when you come to Mass, even though we're not at Mass right now. And so you know but the church calls us to move sometimes, to change. But I wanted to start us in the Old Testament. And there's several times that processions play a part in the life of Scripture in the Old Testament. But one that I think is in particularly a powerful setting, and maybe some infusion that we need, a little bit of energy and joy in our day today, because I don't think we've seen the sun in 24 hours, and we didn't see very much of it, really. We saw some yesterday, but we don't see the sun as much as we would like this time of year. And really, we live in Michigan. Who are we kidding? We don't see the sun very much to begin with. But to go to the procession of King David to the ark. And so our opening prayer will be Psalm 122. And I put the song version in there. I don't expect us all to sing because I actually don't know that setting. But I used songs because I knew that we would get good translations. But before we pray that psalm together, Psalm 122, I wanted to set the scene from 2 Samuel so that we have that understanding of just what's happening. And tonight, of course, then we want to make sure that we hold the people of the Holy Land in our prayers because brothers and sisters, especially the Christians, they're just invisible. Nobody speaks up for them. Nobody is really concerned about their safety. And so we need to be concerned for their safety, and we need to be their voice and to sing in praise with them because they continue to hold our home in these very sacred lands. So this is from 2 Samuel chapter 6. David again assembled all the picked men of Israel, 30,000 in number. Then David and all the people who were with him set out for Baalah of Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which bears the name, the Lord of hosts, enthroned above the cherubim. They transported the ark of God on a new cart and took it away from the house of Abinadab on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, not Ohio, Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the cart, with Ahio walking before it, while David and all the house of Israel danced before the Lord with all their might, with singing and with lyrics, harps, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. As they reached the threshing floor of Nodin, Uzzah stretched out his hand to the ark of God and steadied it, for the oxen were tipping it. Then the Lord became angry with Uzzah. God struck him on the spot, and he died there in God's presence. David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah. Therefore, that place is called Perez Uzzah, even to this day. David became frightened of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" So David was unwilling to take the ark of the Lord with him into the city of David. David deposited it instead at the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And I started in the wrong spot. So, the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. When it was reported to King David that the Lord had blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that he possessed because of the ark of God, David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with joy. As soon as the bearers of the ark of the Lord had advanced 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. Then David came dancing before the Lord with abandon, girt with a linen ephod. David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts of joy and sound of horn. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, we'll skip that verse. They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place within the tent which David had pitched for it. Then David sacrificed burnt offerings and communion offerings before the Lord. When David had finished sacrificing burnt offerings and communion offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord and distributed among all the people the entire multitude of Israel. To every man and every woman, 1 loaf of bread, 1 piece of meat, and 1 raisin cake. Then all the people returned to their homes. This is that joyful procession, right? So it's in 2 parts. They start the procession to the movement of the ark into Jerusalem. And of course, David gets afraid. They stop. They wait 3 months, and it continues. This is perhaps the song that the people sang as they welcomed the ark into Jerusalem. And, of course, remember, their king, girt in a linen ephod and nothing else, danced and sacrificed, performed great rituals. It was a party, okay? So that's the joy that I want us to begin this prayer with. All right, everybody got that? You got your cue? Okay. So it is on the back of your page. I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." And together, I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go to the house of God." And now our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." Jerusalem is a city built on unity and strength. There the tribes of the Lord sing songs of praise to the God of Israel. I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." Peace to you, peace to Jerusalem. May all within your walls dwell in peace. For the sake of my friends, I will say, "Peace, Jerusalem." For the sake of the house of God, I will speak of your might, and I will sanctify your name. I will sanctify your name. I will sanctify your name, O Lord. I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go up to the house of the Lord." I rejoiced when I heard them say, 'Let us go up to the house of the Lord.'" As we gather in the house of the Lord, once again, I'd like you to gather together in groups of 4, 3 or 4. There's 2 questions, right? What is a procession and who participates? So I'd like to hear your thoughts before we begin. I'll give you until 1:45, all right? So you could gather together in groups of 3 or 4. You could figure that out amongst yourselves. I know you're capable. How are you coming? Are you ready to come back together? All right. I saw a couple of head nods. I know. So let me ask you, what is a procession? Yes. Yes, Bailey.
According to theory, a procession is an organized body of people walking in a formal or ceremonial manner.
An organized body of people walking in a formal or ceremonial manner. Anybody have any other answers? Walking together for a purpose. Okay. Any other answers? What are some examples that came up in your discussion? Commencement, okay. Santa parade, thank you. We are in Midland, and we're just around the corner from Santa's house. Corpus Christi, I heard someone say, yes, okay. Palm Sunday, okay, very good. A wedding, okay. A May crowning, sure, yeah. Yeah, there are multiple processions. Mass. All right, very good, Mass, yes. Stations of the Cross are not necessarily a procession. They're a pilgrimage. They can be processional, but they may or may not be. So processions are meant to, of course, get your attention, right? To move, right? You're supposed to go from one place to another. Often, processions bring in pomp and circumstance, and many processions are limited participation, all right? By the end of tonight, as we consider the procession at Mass, I want you to recognize it is not limited participation, but we are all called to follow, and we all participate. So we'll get to that by the end of tonight. I think you'll have that comfort to understand that a procession, as Christ calls us, isn't a limited group, but anyone can join in, and we all do join in. And the Mass encourages us to be a part of the procession. The Mass encourages us to approach God. And it comes from this idea, obviously, that, processions move us from one place to another. I don't know if you've ever thought about, the Exodus. That's one of the earliest processions in the Bible. You can even look at Noah's Ark as a procession, right? How do the animals enter the ark? 2 by 2. How many animals enter the ark? A lot, yeah, a whole lot. I don't know. I heard a really good joke today. It was a kid doing a math problem, and the math problem had the same name as a cousin. And so, as the kid's reading the math problem, it says, so Jaden has $1, a quarter, and 2 pennies. How much money does Jaden have? And he looked at his mom and he said, Jaden broke. And then he starts laughing. So, yeah, Jaden's broke, right? So a lot of animals entered the ark. 6 pairs of all the kosher animals entered the ark. I think oftentimes we think of only one pair per species, but the kosher animals, there were extras taken along for sacrifice and perhaps for food. I'm not sure what the plan was, but it's a lot. But that's a procession. It's a procession because we're called ultimately from slavery to freedom. And we don't get there, by just a random, one day I wake up, gee, I feel free today. No, God calls us. And if we think of the Exodus and we go back to why does Moses tell Pharaoh to let his people go? To worship. We are called to worship. Our God has called us into the desert to worship. And what do the people bring with them? Everything, bring it all. Bring everything. All of their cattle. They can't leave anything behind because everything is involved. So if we can remember that this procession, this call, is to freedom from sin, and we're supposed to bring everything, then it can make that entrance into the Mass a bit more significant, because it's not just the select few who participate in the procession, the formal procession, that are approaching God. But we're all called to worship. And so, when does it begin? The procession at Mass, we could say, well, it begins with the opening hymn. It begins when the altar servers finally get to the back of the church with their candles lit so that the wax can get spilled on the carpet. It begins when the deacon finally decides to meander down the aisle and stop chatting with the people on the way. It begins when Father stops giving fist bumps to the kids on the way or checking in with 15 people. Actually, it begins far before that. It begins when you leave home. Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, because you're responding to God's invitation. What were the animals entering the ark for? For safety, to be preserved from certain death and annihilation. What do we enter the church for? For safety, to be preserved from certain death and annihilation, but also for freedom, for comfort, for joy. And when does it end? Well, the procession ends when we reach heaven. The procession ends when we enter heaven. We're never done. I mean, yes, we could define moments within the liturgy, but what the liturgy is meant to help us to connect with is that we are called to something greater. We are called to true worship and to union with God. And so the entrance is Jesus coming to us. He calls us forth to liberate and lead. If you think of the assembly of the Exodus, who was at the head? The pillar, yeah. So there's the pillar, there's the angel. The Lord led the Exodus. And who is the first to cross into the land of the promised land? Joshua, yeah, Joshua. Joshua is the first to cross into the promised land. So, but it's all a reminder that God leads us. Because the Exodus was not an accidental journey. They weren't so bad at directions. Moses could read a map better than it would take 40 years to arrive from Egypt to the promised land. I mean, Gaza's a bit of a wasteland, and there's lots of territory to navigate. But it wasn't that the people were wandering lost in the desert, but they were distinctly being led because they needed to be ready to assume their place in the promised land, to become the light for the nations. And so it's the same. We need to be ready to assume our place with the Lord, to assume our role in the body of Christ. God calls us forth, moves us from the place where we start so that at the end, we're not in the same place. We've moved. Sometimes it might be glacial speed, and glaciers typically don't move more than a couple of inches in a year. Sometimes, though, even glaciers can move at rapid speed. They can move feet every day if the conditions are just right. We can move sometimes very slowly, but other times very, very fast. But at all times, we're to understand that we're called into this worship. And so that's what the procession is meant to engage our whole senses. Now, for practicality's sakes, and because Catholics are so resistant to change, we don't always have 100% participation in the formal procession. Sometimes the rubrics ask everybody to get up and move, but most times it asks for a select group to enter in, so that it's that as you see this happening, though, as Chuck so rightly observed, it started when you left home. And it doesn't end until you get home, which is, of course, heaven. But the order of a liturgical procession to begin Mass, some processions have slightly different orders, and some processions can even be more involved than the order that I'll cover you, but it starts with, at the beginning of Mass, with incense. If there is going to be incense, the thurifer carrying the thurible and the boat and the incense, of course, just as entering into the people following the pillar of cloud, right? The people following the pillar of cloud. But also, the call is to worship. The call is that we want to cover the stench of our sin with something pleasing. So incense is that visual effect that we have a cue, but also that we need cover. You know, we ourselves are covered in the stench of sin, so we cover it with that pleasing gift of incense. Incense, which was used in temple worship, oftentimes to cover the stench of all of the sacrifice. Even if you think of that reading from 2 Samuel, I mean, there's a lot of blood. You know, David butchered a lot of cattle. That's sometimes there's the practical, but also that mystical. So the incense is first, then the cross. And of course, you all know, because I think most of you were here last month, the shadow of the cross looms heavy over us. We follow, the Lord doesn't ask us to go anywhere He's not willing to go first. And so the cross as the standard that we follow, much like the standard bearers would carry the flags of the people, or in an armed conflict, you know, of older times, that there would be the flag bearers that would go in front of the soldiers. And then candles. Why candles? Of course, because light, right? Wherever God is light. Why do we keep the candle lit next to the tabernacle? Because the light of the sanctuary has been a part of the worship since God gave Moses directions how to build the meeting tent, to keep that light burning at all times. In an ideal world, it would be an olive oil lamp, but they're a little harder to find, so we use a mineral oil candle. Then other servers, right? Other servers who are part of the liturgy but may not have anything to carry. Again, that's that practical nature. If we'll read a bit of that Exodus journey, the practical people, the people who are carrying. A minister is at a selection of the faithful, those who will participate in the liturgy. This would be in a wedding mass. This would be the place where the official witness is, where the couple who are stand in as Christ should go. You can see there's the ideal and then there's the reality and what every young woman dreams of. So don't hold me to this, but I can tell you this is the ideal order of a procession. The deacon of the word comes in next, the first of the ordained ministers carrying the book of the Gospels in a formal procession. Then any concelebrants, any of the concelebrants that would be entering in. and then the presider with the deacon of the altar, those who are going to stand closest to the sacrifice. And ironically, last would be an MC or special assistants to the bishop, because their role is to assist the one who is a presider. There can be other times. I was watching a procession just last week, a week ago today. The Diocese of Fairbanks celebrated the ordination of their newly appointed bishop. So there were a couple of cardinals in attendance, so sometimes the further back in the procession you are, sometimes the higher rank you are, but that of course means the more people you serve, the more at service of building up you are, not that you're more important. So there's a very big difference between a liturgical procession and a procession of at a graduation or procession, a royal procession, where it's about power and authority and honor. The liturgical procession incorporates that, but also the role of how we are to be a part of. And so that procession is meant to be that final movement, right? We all start in our homes, and we approach, and then we come, we enter church, and it doesn't conclude until we arrive in heaven. Because what is the Mass? It's when heaven unites with earth. And we leave earth and we enter the heavenly liturgy. And so that it arrives, or it concludes, when the procession enters the sanctuary, when we all symbolically, even if only for a few measly minutes a week, are in heaven. That's the main procession of any Mass. And sometimes they're more elaborate, sometimes they're more orderly, sometimes it's, there's several children who might be running in at the last minute. That's okay. But the ideal is, of course, that everybody's arrived and it concludes, it kind of culminates. Your preparation at home culminates with the entrance of the presider, who takes the place of Christ, who enters the earthly sanctuary, which is a symbol of the heavenly sanctuary, to make the offering pleasing to God. There are some other processions in a Mass. The preparation of the gifts, where we make a return to the Lord. And I encourage you to pray with Psalm 116 during our time of exposition this evening. It's my favorite psalm. But I think it's the great attitude of recognizing, how can I make a return to the Lord for all that he's done for me? It's a priestly prayer, but we are all, by virtue of our baptism, part of the priestly class. We are called to make holy, to make a return, make offerings to God. And it's that preparation of the gifts in which we do that. And so that too is meant to be a procession. Many times we abbreviate that for convenience. Many times we abbreviate it just because we can't find all of the participants that we might need. But it is ideally a time when everyone would make their procession to present their gift to God. And what's the greatest gift that we make to God but the Eucharist itself, his Son? We present Jesus to God. And so we bring the ingredients for that celebration. And those can be, preparation of the gifts processions can be very elaborate at times for solemnity's sake. But in your mind, that's when you're placing your life before God, because you didn't quite make it all the way up to the front to the sanctuary at the time of the entrance procession, but the preparation of the gifts moves us, right? God has greeted us, he speaks to us, and we move forward and enter into that heavenly sanctuary. We have the procession of communion, where once again we come to Jesus, right? Jesus calls us forth in the same words of John the Baptist. Behold the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those who are called to the supper of the Lamb. And of course, our response comes from I think it's Jairus. I think the centurion. I get the two characters sometimes mixed. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. The official, the Roman official in Capharnaum who called the Lord to come and heal his servant, right? And he said, look, you don't have to come to my house because I know what it's like, right? I have representatives, I send them, they do things in my name. So you just speak, right? You just speak and it will heal your servant. My servant shall be healed. And yet Jesus wants to enter into our homes. So he calls us forward to strengthen us, that we can truly be a people on the move. Or maybe another way to think of that Eucharistic procession is, how many of you have any heart issues or have had any, seen a cardiologist, had to have any heart exams? Got a couple here, that's just two? All right, well, it's our arteries, right? It's the blood moving in the arteries, and that's what the communion procession, again, we're all called to move forward so that we can receive the oxygen. Christ is the heart and the lungs. He provides the oxygen that we need, and we have to carry that back. Or again, another ancient Christian symbol is a beehive. Anybody a beekeeper? No beekeepers? Really? I can't believe it. Such a common profession in today's world. But a beehive. And so, the bees they have that kind of constant flow of energy, one, to keep each other warm, especially in the colder months, and then they also keep moving forward to care for the queen, to give her what she needs, but then they also come forward to get the honey. So that beehive, everybody has their role, and they know their role. The workers know whether they're raising a drone or a queen based on the shape of the hive. They know how, based on the shape of the cell in the hive. They know what they're doing. Yes, Chuck. Very good point. Yes, we can talk about that more, but Chuck said, as he understands it, when you receive the Eucharist, it removes any venial sin that you have on your soul. You are correct, because the Eucharist is the highest sacrament of our initiation. And so if you've been admitted to receive the body and blood of Christ, then you are fully a part of the body of Christ. And mortal sin cannot be forgiven by the Eucharist because you cut yourself off, right? If you sever a limb, if somehow I were to cut my finger off or slice off a chunk or have it pinched, off, whatever it is, I couldn't just, if I eat a good meal, that'll bring strength and health back to that limb. No, I need to go see a doctor to have it reattached. A mortal sin is severing from the body of Christ. Venial sin is compromising our connection with the Lord, but it doesn't sever us. So the Eucharist restores us and forgives that as well. So we have that's all part of that procession, right? We're called to leave the place where we are so that we can go where God wants us to be, and he gives us the strength for that. Those are the main processions of a liturgy. We also think of the recessional, but the recessional is actually, especially in our country, it's kind of like an add-on. The documents of the liturgy just simply say the priest kisses the altar and then leaves. We add the hymn, we add on more to the recessional, just because kind of the size and scope of our churches and buildings. But after the final blessing, the priest reverences the altar, genuflects to the tabernacle, and leaves. That's all that the rubrics call for. It doesn't really have a big going forth, but we try to celebrate that as well. Yes, Bailey. Why? Why do we incense the gifts? So incense, incense, if it is being used, and incense is not required, and it simply says can be. Incense in a full solemn liturgy, incense is used at the entrance procession. The altar is incensed, of course, the preparation of the sacrifice. It comes through the entire community, right? Covering, making a pleasing scent unto the Lord. It is also used at the gospel. So at the proclamation of the gospel and the gospel procession. We didn't even talk about a gospel procession. I missed that one. See? Thanks for asking that question. One more procession in Mass is there's a gospel procession. Again, moving to pay attention, but also that's probably the most triumphal of all of the processions during Mass, because the Lord himself is coming to speak to us. So that gospel procession has that kind of triumphal piece to it, the royal entrance of the Lord. Incense can also then be used at the preparation of the gifts, and it can be used optionally during the consecration if you have properly trained servers who can use the incense. And then finally, at the recessional, it just says, basically, if the minister enters, the minister exits, but there's no direction that any incense would be placed on the coals. It's just simply the minister enters, so the minister exits. So it's meant to be really just exiting with the thurible. They enter, they leave the same way that they came in, so the thurible leads, but without any incense on the coals. Why the incensing of the gifts? Again, it's making a pleasing sacrifice to the Lord. And so there's incense offerings, grain offerings, oil offerings, and then also meat offerings that were part of the first covenant. And so we continue to offer that, to connect that together, that anything that is pleasing and being offered to the Lord. Our prayers, it's another moment of engaging the entire body. Our sense, our sound, our sight, smell, all engaged, touch with that incense, that it kind of just creates that mystic atmosphere, a reminder that at this point, when we go into that preparation of the gifts, now we are really entering into the heavenly sanctuary. Any other questions? So I heard some hints meant earlier throughout the year. And so there are feasts that are associated with processions. So throughout the year, we have various different times that the entire community is invited to be a part of the procession to really help to highlight the significance of the feast. Because the procession is obviously a reminder that we are all moving toward heaven, or invited to move toward heaven. So there is the feast. I kind of went through the liturgical year by calendar. So I started with the first feast of the year that has in calendar, is Candlemas, or the Presentation of the Lord, February 2nd. It's optional, it's not required, but it's encouraged to celebrate a procession of light for the blessing of candles. Of course, that's a hearkening back to the prologue of the Gospel of John. Light has entered the world, and darkness has not overcome it. It's amazing how often, and especially, it's easy for us to see that Christianity took root in the Northern Hemisphere, because February is also the time when the sun is making its triumphal entry back into our lives. And so there's sometimes this, there's this mystical connection, but also sometimes a practical connection that our faith is very much rooted even in the design of creation. And so Candlemas, 2nd of February, at the very entrance, all of the people can be invited to process in with that triumphant entry of light. A little different than the Easter Vigil, but still that same connection of the power of light. And perhaps a good connection, because Candlemas is the last feast of what used to be the Christmas cycle. It would close out the Christmas cycle. And for some sects of the Catholic Church, is the beginning of Lent. That you celebrate the second, and then the next day you have a beginning of Lent, which for some years can put you into a very long Lent. It's not quite as severe as the Lent preparation of Lent, the immediate weeks before Easter, but in the Orthodox Church and in other Eastern rites of the Church, after Candlemas they begin their fasting and their preparation. So it's an anticipation as well of what we're going to celebrate at the Vigil. Palm Sunday, again, the entire community is encouraged at the main liturgy of the parish. And sometimes and I think this is just our bias in the United States, our bias in the West, but especially in the U.S. We are very biased to everybody is equal, right? We're all equal. So if it's good at one Mass, it should be at all the Masses. So the rubrics really only call for one major participation in this kind of triumphal entry, the welcoming of Jesus into the city of David, the shouts of Hosanna, the procession with palms, which is ideally, you gather outside of the church and you move to the church. So again, that because of our faith, we who once were outside are now inside. And because of our faith, we who once shouted and greeted the Lord with hosannas and fell into sin are made worthy again through Christ's sacrifice. So it's a lot of understanding. It starts off our processions throughout Holy Week, the week of processions. Holy Thursday, very different than our celebration of Corpus Christi. We process behind the Eucharist, but not so much because we're such good followers of the Lord, but because, like the disciples, we grow tired. Like the disciples, we tend to fall away. And so we're called into that mystery of the agony in the garden, because that's the procession that we capture. Is after supper, they sang songs and they went to the garden. And so we sit with the Lord in vigil, because after the garden, we know that he was abandoned, and we know how often we abandon him. Yes, Kathy? Correct. We have the procession with the oils. Yes, there are other processions. The presentation, it's really not that's a presentation of the oils is what the rite calls it, but we often treat it like a procession, that entrance. And those oils already, Holy Thursday, again, we're just starting the Triduum, that beautiful time of remembrance and experience. Again, when we speak of memory, and when it comes to the Triduum, it's anamnesis. And what's the opposite of anamnesis? Is amnesia. I cannot remember. And anamnesis is that immersion into the experience, not something that is just kind of in a 2D, but really a 4D. We experience the offering of Christ again. So the Holy Thursday procession, the procession of the day, is the one at the end of Mass. And notice as well that it takes place, the Mass doesn't end, because there's no formal dismissal, there's no formal sending. It is just, we follow the Lord, and then we leave. We kind of scatter. And how appropriate that is, because that's exactly what happened from the garden, right? We get scattered. We grow tired. But the Lord remains. And then Good Friday. Again, the main procession. Although we process as well, we do have a procession to receive the Eucharist. Just as on Holy Thursday, we have the entrance procession, we have the procession of gifts, we have the communion procession, all part of that Mass. On Good Friday, we don't really have an entrance procession, because the Mass just kind of begins. It begins in silence. The ministers arrive at the altar, lay prostrate before the Lord, and then rise, and we begin in prayer. And our first procession on Good Friday is the veneration of the cross. And a time coming forward, doing perhaps what, St. John and our Blessed Mother did, in having the strength to stand at the foot of the cross. And this year, we get to enhance that, of course, because we now have a relic of the true cross on display that you can venerate at any time at the altar of St. Joseph. Perhaps during Lent, with the exception of Fridays, it may take a little hiatus, but it is there and can be used just as a reminder that we too are called to stand at the foot of the cross, to gaze upon the one that we have rejected, to gaze upon the one who has saved us, to draw strength from him. Because the vigil doesn't, or the Triduum doesn't stop at Good Friday. It continues on to Easter Vigil. And once again, we gather outside and we enter a dark church, a dark world, and bring the light that we received in baptism. Yes, Chuck? Correct. It is not a Mass. We don't celebrate Mass. There are 2 days of the year that we don't have a Mass. That would be Good Friday and Holy Saturday. Although the vigil for Easter can take place after dark on Holy Saturday. Some communities choose to wait until midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning to try to celebrate the vigil. The only rubric, it says it has to take place after dark and end before light. So it's supposed to end before sunrise. So it's not a sunrise service. It is to be concluded before the sun rises. We wait until it's close to, because again, we're very practical people. That, and I really like my sleep. If you know me at all, you know if I'm not sleeping well, I'm just not the same person. The vigil ends, we start it after dark, at 20 minutes after the sun has set, but typically there's still some light in the sky because we're gifted with the beautiful gift of twilight. But there is no Mass on Good Friday, you're correct. So it is a service of the pre-consecrated. The Eucharist that we receive on Good Friday was consecrated on Holy Thursday. So we have the triumphal entry of light, the new life that we receive in baptism, and then Corpus Christi, where we are called literally, or where we proclaim to the world. The procession of Corpus Christi cannot be in the church, it has to be outside. It cannot be in the church building, but it has to be outside because we follow the Lord in our lives. So we take the faith leads us, Jesus leads us, not only to heaven, but to meet our brothers and sisters. All in all, some concluding thoughts, and I just glanced at my watch and I was like, wow, this is what happens when you don't script yourself well enough. You go really long. Processions are meant to be a reminder that we're drawn out of ourself. We're drawn towards God, and that we never walk alone, right? I think you all know this. I don't have to remind you, but I'll say it anyway because it's my favorite. I need to remember when you walk with Jesus, you're not alone, right? And we follow in the place of the disciples. We are the disciples. So, hopefully you want to participate. I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to just kind of think about that. What have you learned about the procession and the reasons we should all participate and be present? I'll save, you can look at those discussions, how to participate, and then I'll proclaim the stand at the door of your tent, the Exodus. I'll proclaim that during our time of exposition and prayer. But what have you learned about the procession? Yes. It is a lifelong journey. Thank you, Lynn. I know you want to say something, Kathy. Difference between a procession and a pilgrimage. You know, a pilgrimage is a reminder our whole lives are a return to God, are meant to be a return to God. A procession is typically a particular moment, and pilgrimage can be more drawn out. Your life is a pilgrim. To return to heaven, yeah. So the procession is meant to remind us we are pilgrims, right? We are not people of the world. We are people in the world. God's people are not worldly, but we are in the world as the light to call others towards heaven. It ends when you enter heaven. Yeah. The liturgical processions do have a distinct end, but they remind us of what in our lives. Yes, Chuck. True. All of our processions are meant to be with some type of reverence, and that's a lifelong journey, of course, of recognizing. There's one piece of advice, though, is it's meant to be reverence of the Lord. So we always want to make sure that our actions are drawing attention to Jesus and not drawing attention to me. And so sometimes we get into a place and we start to think, oh, I'm going to be the really good and holy one. And by no means am I saying anybody sitting in this church tonight has this attitude, but we can all fall prey to it, or even accidentally. Like, I want to show my reverence to the Lord, and so I'm going to take the time to genuflect, but I'm kind of stiff, and I'm gonna make, I might even stumble or fall. Well, that's probably not really reverential either. So we always have to kind of recognize we want to be reverential, but that's an attitude too. Like, the gift of fear of the Lord. Joyful as well. Let us go rejoicing. Any other questions or responses? All right, well, I will let you sit in silence for a couple of moments. I'll prepare for exposition, and then we'll have some time to sit with the Lord, and I'll share the last scripture about standing at the door of your tent after the Lord has been exposed. So I think it'll be a great time of prayer for us all. And I encourage you to use Psalm 116 in your time of prayer.